I'm Emma, a 34-year-old who has transitioned from being a photographer to a full-time mom. The world that I once saw through the precise frame of my camera now circles endlessly around my sleeping infant in the next room. Yet beneath the apparent tranquility of new motherhood, an uneasy tension has begun to surface. Our home, a sanctuary Alex and I once cherished, now echoes with a hollow sense of abandonment. The terrace, where dreams were shared over morning coffees, now taunts me with its vast, unnerving emptiness. Our once vibrant garden lies silent, bearing witness to the expanding void in our lives. I vividly recall the day we returned from the hospital with our newborn. I had envisioned a homecoming filled with warmth and joyful tears. Instead, I was met with Alex's distant gaze, which barely concealed his indifference. "Honey, aren't you excited? Say hello to your son," I urged, my voice quivering as I attempted to disguise the tremor of unease. Alex's fleeting glance at our child lacked warmth, his words were perfunctory. "Yeah, he's great. I'm just not good with babies, you know. Give me time." But it wasn't merely about the baby. The Alex I fell in love with, who once filled our home with laughter and optimism, seemed to have dissipated. Each evening, he returned from work wearing exhaustion like a mask, his words few and hollow. One night, as I rocked our son in the quiet of his room, the silence enveloping us grew unbearable. "Alex, we need to talk. This distance, it's not just about the baby, is it?" He sighed, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the walls of our deteriorating haven. "Emma, don't start. I'm tired. Work's a mess. I don't need another lecture." His words, dismissive and cold, ignited a mix of anger and fear within me. "Lecture? Alex, look at us, at our family. You're a father now, and I feel like I'm doing this all alone." For the first time, he really looked at me, his eyes cold and distant. "What do you want from me, Emma? A parade? I'm here, I'm working, I'm providing. What more do you want?" His response stung, each word widening the chasm that had formed between us. "I want you, Alex. The man I married, the man who promised to be by my side, not just a shadow that haunts our home." He stood abruptly, his frustration palpable. "I can't deal with this right now. I'm not the enemy, Emma. Maybe you're the one who's changed." Life after bringing our son home wasn't the blissful portrait I had imagined. Instead, it resembled a puzzle where the pieces no longer fit. Alex, the man I had vowed to share my life with, had shifted the most. His late nights at work, once rare, were now becoming a troubling pattern, echoing a past that seemed to repeat itself. I watched Alex walk away, leaving me alone in the overwhelming stillness that now filled our home. Cradling our son closer, I pondered the gaping rift that had developed between us, widened by unspoken fears and unresolved issues. It was just another Monday afternoon, my thoughts a tangled mess, when my phone buzzed with a notification, a message from someone I hadn't expected. Pausing for a moment, I hesitated before opening it. The sender was a mutual friend, someone who had known Alex and me both in our freer, happier times and now, in these days shadowed with doubts. The message read, "Hey Emma, I've been trying to reach Alex about the reunion. Is he okay? Everyone's been asking about him. It's been ages since he's shown up to any get-together." This simple inquiry, laden with concern, seemed to echo my own worries. I responded with a forced casualness, trying to mask the unease that had become a constant companion. "Hey. Thanks for checking in. Yeah, he's just been really caught up with work lately, a lot on his plate. We're managing, though. How's everyone?" Putting down the phone, I reflected on our recent interactions. They were now mere exchanges of necessities, the warmth we once shared reduced to cold practicalities. I missed the man who would wrap his arms around me after a long day, whose laughter filled our home, whose eyes sparkled with mischief and affection. That Alex seemed like a ghost now, his essence replaced by a stranger who shared his face, but not his heart. As I sat there, the baby finally asleep in my arms, the quiet felt suffocating. The house, once alive with our dreams and plans, now seemed to press down on me with the weight of our growing estrangement. Alex's recent behavior, his avoidance, his late returns home, his irritation at being questioned, felt hauntingly familiar. It mirrored a time before, one we had struggled hard to move past. A time when trust was shattered and had to be painstakingly rebuilt, brick by brick. His accusation earlier that evening rang in my ears. "So, what, you think I'm cheating again?" The bitterness of his tone had been palpable, a sharp contrast to the emptiness that followed. The more I thought about it, the more the patterns seemed to align too closely for comfort. The late nights, the distance, the silence, it wasn't just my imagination. There was something amiss, and it wasn't just in my head. I needed answers, but I also needed to maintain a semblance of peace, at least for our son's sake. As I laid him down in his crib, his tiny hand clutching my finger momentarily, I realized I wasn't ready to give up on us, not without trying to bridge this chasm that had opened between us. I had to find a way to reach Alex, to reconnect with the man I knew and loved, to ensure that the family we dreamed of could still become a reality. Maybe it was time for a more direct approach, a heart-to-heart conversation, or maybe even counseling. Something had to change, and it needed to start soon. At the door, her eyes hesitant, mirroring the discomfort that clearly clung to the situation. I was still grappling with the fallout of his betrayal, my emotions a tangle of confusion and hurt. Yet here he was, standing at my doorstep with the very woman from the photos. "Emma, please, can we talk?" Alex's voice broke slightly, the strain evident. The woman beside him shifted uncomfortably, as if ready to retreat at a moment's notice. I hesitated, my instinct was to close the door and shut them out, but a part of me needed to hear what they had to say, to understand the full extent of the deceit. With a silent nod, I stepped back, allowing them into the living room. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with unspoken words as I held our son closer to my chest, his presence a comforting weight. Alex introduced her as Melissa. She looked at me, her expression a mix of guilt and sorrow. "Emma, I'm so sorry you had to find out this way. I think it's time we all talked openly." Alex took a deep breath, his next words coming out in a rush. "Emma, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you or our son. It started as a mistake, a one-time thing that spiraled out of control. Melissa and it wasn't planned, and before I knew it, things got complicated." Melissa interjected, her voice low, "We have 3 children, Emma. They know nothing about this, about you or your son. They think Alex lives here, because of his job demands." I listened, the sting of each word slicing through the last vestiges of the life I thought we had. "How could you?" I managed to whisper, my voice a mix of disbelief and pain. "How could you live a double life for years, Alex? And you," I turned to Melissa, "how could you be part of this knowing he has another family?" Melissa's eyes filled with tears. "I'm truly sorry, Emma. We wanted to tell you many times, but we didn't know how. And the longer we waited, the more difficult it became." Alex looked defeated, his usual confidence gone. "I know I've ruined everything. I've been a coward, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want to make things right, as much as I can." The conversation was painful, every confession and explanation like a blow to the remnants of the trust and love I once had for Alex. But it was necessary, unraveling the lies to see the stark truth of our situation. After a long discussion, Alex and Melissa left, the door closing softly behind them. I was left in the quiet aftermath, holding our son, the innocent face of my child, a stark contrast to the complex, painful adult reality swirling around us. As I rocked him gently, trying to soothe him back to sleep, my mind raced with the implications of the day's revelations. What would come next was uncertain, but I knew that whatever decisions I made, they would be for my son's future and my own peace of mind. My heart pounding and my mind racing with disbelief and fury. How could Alex bring her here, to our home, the home we built together, and allow her to stake her claim so brazenly? The audacity of her words, her demeanor, it all felt like a surreal nightmare. I stood there for what seemed like an eternity, trying to process the encounter. My eyes drifted around the room, each object, each photo, a testament to the life I thought we had, now shattered by the truth of Alex's double existence. I felt rooted to the spot, yet a fierce resolve was building within me. I needed to act, to protect not just the physical space that was my home, but also the emotional sanctuary I had created for myself and my son. This was no longer just about a marriage gone awry or a broken heart. It was about standing my ground against an intrusion that threatened to strip me of my dignity and security. As the silence enveloped me, I realized that waiting for Alex to sort out his mess was no longer an option. I had to take control. I dialed my lawyer's number, the phone shaking slightly in my hand. When he answered, my words came out rushed but clear. I need to file for a divorce, and I want to make sure that my rights to the house and the custody of my son are fully protected. Alex brought the other woman into our home today. She claims they need the house more than I do. My lawyer's response was swift and reassuring. Emma, we'll make sure you're protected. I'll start the paperwork immediately and file for an emergency hearing, given the circumstances. We'll also need to document everything that happened today. After hanging up, I felt a small measure of relief, but the gravity of the situation still weighed heavily on me. The next steps would be challenging, navigating the legal battles and the emotional turmoil. Yet, there was a part of me that felt empowered, knowing that I was taking definitive action to reclaim my life and ensure a safe, stable future for my son. The house was quieter now, the echoes of the confrontation still lingering in the air. I walked over to my son's crib, watching him sleep peacefully, oblivious to the storm around him. In that moment, I promised myself and him that no matter what lay ahead, I would shield him from as much of this chaos as possible. Drawing strength from his innocent calm, I began to plan. I would need to gather all pertinent documents, secure personal belongings, and perhaps most importantly, rally a support system around me. I reached out to a few close friends, explaining the situation without going into all the painful details. Their offers of help and words of support provided a much-needed comfort. As the evening drew to a close, I sat down with a notepad, jotting down everything I needed to address in the coming days. There was much to do, and I was ready to face it head-on. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but I was determined to emerge stronger, for my sake and for my son's. The fight for my home, my dignity, and my family's future had just begun. I held my ground, my heart pounding yet filled with a newfound resolve as I watched the confusion and fear play out across the woman's face. You need to understand, this isn't just a house. It's my home, and it's where I'm raising my son. Alex has deceived both of us, but I won't let those deceptions dictate my life or my child's any longer. The woman seemed to shrink a little, the reality of the situation dawning on her. Alex's eyes met mine for a brief moment, filled with regret and resignation. He knew the game was up. There was no more room for lies, no more shadows to hide within. Emma, he began, his voice barely a whisper, I'm so sorry. I never wanted it to go this far. Sorry isn't enough, Alex. Not anymore, I replied, my voice firm. You need to leave. Take responsibility for the mess you've created, but not here. This is no longer your place. The woman, now visibly shaken, turned to Alex, her voice a mix of anger and pleading. Alex, please, tell me she's lying. We have children. You promised. Alex finally spoke up, the weight of his guilt making his words heavy. She's not lying. I'm not who I told you I was. This house, it was never mine to give or promise. I'm sorry. As the bitter truth settled in the air between us, the woman looked from me to Alex, her expression one of someone who's seen the ground fall away beneath them. So, what are we supposed to do now? She asked, desperation creeping into her voice. That's something you'll have to figure out, but not here, I said, stepping closer to the door, indicating that it was time for them to leave. You'll need to make other arrangements. This house is for my son and me. With a heavy heart but clear conscience, I watched as Alex and the woman slowly walked back to their car, their steps unsteady. The door closed behind them with a definitive thud, sealing off my old life with all its deceit and pain. As I leaned against the door, the adrenaline slowly fading, I felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that I had stood my ground and protected my sanctuary, and sorrow for the tangled webs of deceit that had led us to this moment. I walked back to the living room, where my son was playing quietly on the floor, blissfully unaware of the turmoil. I scooped him up into my arms, his presence a reminder of what truly mattered. The battle may have been won, but I knew the war for peace and rebuilding my life, was just beginning. As I looked down at my son, his eyes wide with innocent curiosity, I whispered a promise to him: "We're going to be okay, just you and me. We're going to be just fine." And in that moment, I believed it. Should be providing for them. It's not my responsibility to provide for your children, nor is it my obligation to share my home, a home that was never part of Alex's life in terms of ownership. Her expression twisted into one of disbelief, as if she couldn't comprehend that the manipulation she had relied on for so long was failing her now. "Alex should have told you the truth from the beginning," I continued, my voice growing firmer. "This house was never his to promise to anyone. You've been misled, but not by me." She scoffed, the sharp sound slicing through the tense air. "Misled? No, Emma, I think you're the one who's deluding herself. Alex was as much a part of this house as you were, in spirit if not in deed." "That's where you're wrong," I countered sharply. "Being a part of a home isn't just about being there in spirit. It's about honesty, contribution, and commitment, none of which Alex has shown, as evident by his actions. You both need to leave now. This is the last time I will tell you." Her eyes flared with a mix of fury and desperation. The children, silent and observant, seemed to shrink back, their eyes wide in the brewing storm. The sight of them, caught in the middle of this adult chaos, tugged at my heart, but I steeled myself against the emotional play. "This isn't over, Emma. You think you've won, but this isn't the end," she spat out, her words a venomous promise. "Whatever you think you can do, I'll be ready for it," I replied calmly, though my pulse raced with the undercurrent of threat in her voice. "Now, I'm asking you to leave for the last time." With a huff of disdain, she herded her children away, her parting look one of scorched earth. As they walked away, the gathered neighbors began to disperse, their whispers still hanging in the air like a lingering fog. Closing the door, I leaned against it, the cool surface grounding me as I let out a slow, steadying breath. The confrontation had drained me, yet I knew this reprieve would be temporary. I had to prepare for whatever she planned next. Her words, full of spite and promises of retaliation, echoed in my mind, a clear indication that the battle for peace in my life was far from over. Looking around, I felt the weight of the house around me, a fortress and a sanctuary, now more than ever. I knew I needed to fortify myself for whatever came next, for my sake and for my son's. The reality of my situation had crystallized into a sharp focus. I was alone in this fight, but I was also resolute. I had to be the shield against the chaos, to protect the tranquil life I so fiercely wanted to preserve for my son and myself. He'd think that after everything, after all the lies and betrayal, he could just return and expect things to be mended? I stared at him, my heart racing with a mix of anger and disbelief. "How can you possibly think that's an option, Alex?" My voice was a mix of incredulity and anger. "You walk back here, after breaking our trust, expecting to just step back into our lives like nothing happened?" Alex's expression was pained, his eyes pleading. "Emma, I know I've done unforgivable things. But I've lost everything now. I've seen the error of my ways. I don't expect forgiveness overnight, but I am asking for a chance to make things right." The nerve of his words made me want to slam the door in his face, to shut out his desperation and his apologies. It would be easier, simpler, to just turn away from him and this mess he'd dragged to my doorstep. But there was something in his tone, a desperation or perhaps a sincerity that hadn't been there before. It gave me pause. "You've seen the error of your ways?" I echoed, my tone skeptical. "Or have you just seen the consequences?" "There's a difference, Alex. Our son and we've been living with the consequences of your actions. You can't just decide to be a part of our lives again because it suits you now. He nodded slowly, the weight of my words seeming to settle on him. I know, Emma. I know it's a lot to even ask. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I want to be a part of his life, to be the father he deserves, not the one I've been. I took a deep breath, my mind racing with conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to believe him, to allow him the chance to prove he could change. Yet, another part, the part wounded by months of deception and pain, resisted. You want to make things right? I finally said, measuring each word. It starts with proving you can be the father our son needs. And that doesn't mean just showing up when you feel like it. It means consistent effort, it means transparency, and most of all, it means respecting the new boundaries I set. Alex nodded, seeming to understand the gravity of my terms. I agree to all of that. I'll do everything I can. I just want to be part of his life, and yours, if you'll let me. I'll consider it, I said cautiously, but for now, you need to give me space to think about this, to decide what's best for our son. This isn't just about us anymore. As he left, the promise of a long and uncertain path lay ahead. I closed the door behind him, leaning against it as I let out a sigh. The reality of reconciling with the past while protecting the future was daunting, but for my son's sake, I knew I had to consider every possibility carefully, even if that meant potentially opening the door to Alex again, under very different terms. I stood there for a moment after putting my son to bed, the silence of the house enveloping me like a soft blanket. The peace was a stark contrast to the tumult that had rocked our lives, but it was a welcome one. I walked back to the living room, my feet padding softly against the floor, feeling the weight of the day's emotions slowly lifting. With each step, I felt more anchored in my new reality, a reality where I was the sole architect. The freedom was intoxicating, yet daunting. For years, my life had been intertwined with Alex's, our decisions and dreams shared. Now, it was just my son and me, our path ours to shape. As I settled into the couch, I let my mind wander over the events that had unfolded. From the heartbreak of betrayal to the fierce battles for my home and dignity, each moment had tested my resolve. But they had also forged me into someone stronger, more resilient. Alex's choices had indeed changed the course of our lives, but they hadn't defined them. I had reclaimed that power, piece by piece. The quiet of the night was broken only by the soft ticking of the clock and the occasional distant sounds of the city. It was in these quiet moments that I often found myself reflecting the most. The battles I had fought weren't just for a house or against Alex's deceit, they were for my identity, for my voice. I realized that my journey wasn't just about overcoming the challenges thrown at me. It was about rediscovering who I was outside the shadows of a failing marriage. It was about showing my son the strength of standing up for oneself, about modeling resilience and integrity. The camera beside me on the coffee table caught my eye again. I picked it up, feeling the familiar contours and the weight that spoke of reliability and artistry. Photography had once been my passion, a way to capture the world's hidden whispers and bold declarations. Somewhere along the way, amidst the chaos of my personal life, I had put it aside. Now, as I looked through the lens, focusing on the mundane yet comforting scenes of my home, I felt a connection reignite. Each frame I captured was more than just an image, it was a reclaiming of my perspective, a way to see the world through my eyes, unfiltered by anyone else's expectations or betrayals. My phone buzzed again, pulling me back from my thoughts. It was a message from another friend, checking in. Their words, full of encouragement and shared strength, were a reminder of the network of support that had held me up when I was close to breaking. I typed back a quick thank you, a smile touching my lips. The road ahead would surely have its share of obstacles, but I felt ready to face them, fortified by my regained sense of self and the love of my friends and family. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, the echoes of my son's laughter from earlier in the day filled my heart. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was also bright with the promise of new beginnings and new stories to tell. Stories of us, of me, and my son, moving forward with hope and an unyielding resolve to create a life filled with joy, love, and endless possibilities.